that Rodriguez, and when he tried to shop this book around, he circled names that he said were co-conspirators and material witnesses to Epstein's sex trafficking crimes. So Flavio Briatore is one of the circled names. Alan Dershowitz is a circled name. Leslie Wexner, Jean-Luc Brunel, who is the French accomplice of Epstein that died in prison while awaiting trial in 2022. And then Donald Trump is also a circled name. But Rodriguez didn't specify why he circled those names, and he died the year that the book was published by Gawker and also in prison. And I'm not really sure there's any information on the circumstances of his death.
There is a sickness at the heart of global power, an elite network that operates above the law, insulated by wealth, secrecy, and silence. Over the past 2 decades, one scandal has exposed the depths of that depravity more than any other: the Jeffrey Epstein case. Tied to royals, presidents, billionaires, and intelligence agencies, Epstein's blackmail operation wasn't just about sex, it was about control. And disturbingly, many of those closest to the levers of global power have ties to this underground world of exploitation and abuse. Few have dared to follow the entire trail, but journalist Whitney Webb has. Through years of meticulous investigation, chronicled in her book One Nation Under Blackmail, Webb has uncovered how intelligence networks, organized crime syndicates, and high-level financiers have operated as a single, intertwined system. Her latest work revisits one of the darkest corners of the Epstein story: the names in the infamous Black Book. Not just Epstein's contacts, but his inner circle of collaborators, enablers, and alleged co-conspirators. And now, she's asking a dangerous question. Why is Donald Trump, who once promised to expose the truth, now claiming the Epstein client list doesn't exist at all? It's a stunning reversal. During his 2024 campaign, Trump repeatedly hinted at explosive revelations, vowing to reveal what others wouldn't, and reigniting MAGA hopes that he would finally bring elite predators to justice. But since re-entering office, he's not only walked back those claims, he's begun distancing himself entirely from the Epstein scandal, despite long-standing ties and mutual associates. According to Webb, that silence may be less about self-preservation and more about protecting certain powerful friends whose names appear in damning places. We'll let Whitney walk us through the evidence herself, but first, if you value independent journalism that asks the questions mainstream media refuses to, hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know what you think in the comments. Who do you think is really pulling the strings? Let's dive in.
You've written this piece on Unlimited Hangout that proposes a theory. Now, some folks think, well, Trump's effort to distract from all of this must be because he's implicated. You say it might be the case, but it also might be the case that he's trying to protect one or multiple very close friends of his that are also potentially implicated. Tell me what you've written about here.
I started a new series, which is called First Friends, which is sort of like a play on, like First Lady. And yeah, the idea is what you said, exploring the possibility of figures close to Donald Trump, still close to Donald Trump, that have unusual, or rather that have never been reported about connections to Epstein, which suggests that, if I could find it, I'm sure the New York Times and these people could have found it too. And why haven't they reported on it, especially if there's blood in the water against their least favorite president, right? So the first person in this series is about a man named Flavio Briatore, who's probably best known for his career as a top guy in Formula One racing in Europe. He's Italian. He's also pretty well known for having dated and been engaged at one time to Naomi Campbell and later fathering Heidi Klum's first child, Lenny Klum. But beyond that, he's a longtime friend of Donald Trump. As I put in the article, there's a video of them together doing the Italian edition of The Apprentice, because, as Trump says in the video, when it was time to bring The Apprentice to Italy, there were lots of people that wanted to star in it, but he only wanted one person, and that was his longtime friend, Flavio, and they talk about their long-term friendship in that clip for those that are interested. But Flavio Briatore has a few unusual links to the Epstein case, which I explore here. And one of them has to do with the Black Book itself, The Black Book is this book of contacts that are Epstein's, but Epstein didn't necessarily write it. His staff wrote it. And so it wasn't just one staff member, it was a few members of his staff in his Palm Beach residence that compiled this list of contacts. But it was deemed legitimate enough to be used as evidence in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial a couple years ago. So it's considered to give it was then considered to give a relatively accurate portrayal of the time of sort of, frequently contacted figures in Epstein's world during, the particular period of time that the Palm Beach case in particular spanned. And so that book became public. Well, it was originally published and made actually public by the investigative journalist Nick Bryant, who's also known for investigating the Franklin scandal, which is sort of a Reagan-Bush era pedophile scandal involving government officials. And he published that at Gawker, I believe, in 2015, but he came into possession of it sometime, I think, around 2012 or so, he said. But prior to that, the FBI obtained it from Jeffrey Epstein's former butler, Alfredo Rodriguez, who died the same year it was published in 2015. But earlier, he had tried to basically sell the Black Book, initially to one of the victims' lawyers, Brad Edwards, who works with Stanley Pottinger at, I forget the name of their law firm, but they're two of the main Epstein lawyers. And so instead of buying the book, I mean, obviously it's fair that he wouldn't pay an enormous, the large sum that Rodriguez was asking for it. But Edwards instead tipped off the FBI and basically sicked the FBI on this guy. And the FBI set up a sting operation to buy the book from him, and Rodriguez went to prison, which later Epstein, when he was asked about it, said about the Black Book, he was like, it never should have been published. It was terrible that it was published, but now my butler, or, my former butler is in prison for, the crime of publishing it. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. That's not a direct quote, but that was essentially what he was saying. So he agreed with Rodriguez being put away. And it's important to point out that Epstein was an FBI informant during this period. So, there may have been some duplicity there, but again, I don't know. But what's important here is that Rodriguez, and when he tried to shop this book around, he circled names that he said were co-conspirators and material witnesses to Epstein's sex trafficking crimes. So Flavio Briatore is one of the circled names. Alan Dershowitz is a circled name. Leslie Wexner, Jean-Luc Brunel, who is the French accomplice of Epstein that died in prison while awaiting trial in 2022. And then Donald Trump is also a circled name, which oddly enough hasn't really gotten a lot of coverage over the years. Nick Bryant, of course, talked about that, but a lot of people act like Trump was never accused. And then Brad Edwards later went out and said to Derek Brose when he was interviewed by him that Trump had actually been very helpful. But of course, Trump and Epstein at that point had a personal falling out. And also Brad Edwards' law partner, Stanley Pottinger, has kind of a suspect history, sort of acting like the Democrat equivalent of William Barr, which is basically a mop-up man for government scandals. Over the course of his lengthy career as a lawyer working on behalf of the government and the Department of Justice. So there's a lot of question marks there. But Rodriguez didn't specify why he circled those names, and he died the year that the book was published by Gawker and also in prison. And I'm not really sure there's any information on the circumstances of his death. And that's also, of course, the year that Donald Trump declares his candidacy for president.
Okay.
So what does it mean when a name is circled in Epstein's Black Book? According to the butler who first tried to leak it, Alfredo Rodriguez, those weren't just contacts. They were people he believed to be co-conspirators and material witnesses. That list, marked by someone on the inside, included figures like Leslie Wexner, Alan Dershowitz, Jean-Luc Brunel, another associate with a questionable death, and yes, Donald Trump himself. Rodriguez was never allowed to explain the full context. He was imprisoned after a sting operation set up by the FBI, then died in custody the same year the book was finally published. No charges were brought based on his annotations. No investigation was launched into why certain names were circled. And oddly, no media outrage followed. Trump's name, in particular, has largely been swept aside, despite multiple references to his close associations with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, including documented footage and long-standing personal ties. But as Whitney points out, this isn't just about Trump's name appearing on a list. It's about the deeper, more troubling possibility that individuals close to him may also be implicated, that some of those same first friends, now shielded by proximity to power, may have connections the public was never supposed to see. And yet, despite all this, there was no formal inquiry into Rodriguez's death, no questions asked about why critical witnesses keep turning up dead, and no government accountability, only silence. And this silence becomes deafening when we consider what came next. Let's get back to Whitney's video.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but at the time, Trump was not a political candidate, and a lot of the other names that are circled are people that are well known to have been accomplices to the crime, like Maxwell, like Jean-Luc Brunel, Leslie Wexner, Jeffrey Epstein's main benefactor. And we also do know, for example, that the most famous Epstein victim of all, who died earlier this year, Virginia Roberts, she was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell while working at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. So there's a possibility that there may have been something there. But again, we don't really know because we can't ask the guy. But it is convenient that he cannot be asked. But there you go.
And there was no investigation into the circumstances of his death in prison, even given these suspicions around Epstein dying in similar circumstances?
I don't believe so. I was looking into it and was able to find out some other things, but was unable to find information on how he died in prison while serving a sentence related to this. What's also fascinating to me, though, is that 2015 is the year that Gawker starts to be sued into oblivion by Peter Thiel. And now we know that in 2014 and 2015, Thiel and Epstein were meeting regularly. And Peter Thiel was also an FBI informant during that time.
How do we know these men were FBI informants?
I'm pretty sure in the case of Epstein, and it's sourced in my book, but I'm pretty sure it's the FBI admitted it, or another aspect of the government admitted it because it came up in a court case. I forget which victim court case.
The kind of MAGA base turning on Trump for not being transparent about Epstein. They are also increasingly frustrated with his betrayal as the quote unquote anti-war candidate and the America First candidate.
Sure.
And these things are related through Epstein to the extent that it has been often argued, and there has been speculation that the reason that the United States is so committed to Israel, no matter what it does, no matter how poorly it reflects on America's political reputation, no matter how much it costs America, no matter how much it costs individual political candidates in an electoral space, for example, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and now Donald Trump, who's taking a hit over it, is because there's some compromise. There's some relationship there. And Donald Trump being so close to Epstein, of course, raises the suspicion that he in particular has his hands tied and that he cannot change course politically with respect to America's unqualified support of Israel, because if he does, something disastrous, something scandalous will be revealed about him. So I would love you to speak to the claims that there is some sort of blackmail specifically that basically constrains Trump, this administration, other administrations' adherence to Israel as a country and Israel's choices in particular in Gaza right now, is the genocide.
So it's hard to know if it's blackmail or if it's because basically the same people behind Donald Trump are the same people behind Epstein. So even if they had a personal falling out, that wouldn't necessarily change the fact that their benefactors tend to have been more or less the same people. So it's also, it is possible that there is blackmail somewhere, that they're hanging over Trump's head on this particular case and with the case of Israel, or it's the case that a lot of the powers that pull the strings of the current Likud government and Israel and, Donald Trump's administration are, have a lot of overlap. I guess as an overview, Donald Trump, was mentored by Roy Cohn was a mob lawyer. He sort of had one foot in the legitimate world, having ties to the Reagan administration and the Nixon administration, for example, but he was also a lawyer for organized crime families in New York. And if you look at his background, his dad ran this secret society that later Edgar Bronfman and Leslie Wexner's mentors and a lot of these figures were part of, called B'nai B'rith. And then Roy Cohn's mentors was this Italian businessman who was very closely tied to the mob, named Generoso Pope. And Pope's son was Roy Cohn's best friend growing up. And from Pope, who was very tied up with the Sicilian mafia and also very close, and also the Italian mafia in New York, he was also a big fan of Mussolini era fascism and controlled Italian language newspapers in New York and used that to try and manipulate Italian American votes. And he basically taught Roy Cohn this system called the favor bank, Roy Cohn called it, which is basically we see today now in Trump's art of the deal, which is sort of how to establish backroom deals. You do a favor for me, I do a favor for you. And it's really, explains a lot of how political power has worked in the US for some time. It's, of course, not exclusive to these people, but you can see how these things have developed over time. And so, in the case of Trump, in around the year that Roy Cohn dies, he becomes the controlling shareholder of a company called Resorts International. So Resorts International has long-term affiliations to the same syndicate of organized crime, specifically the Jewish American head of it, Meyer Lansky. Resorts International was also created initially. It was formerly Mary Carter Paint Company, which was is an acknowledged CIA front company. So basically, Donald Trump became controlling shareholder of this in '87. That's also the year, I believe, that he bought Adnan Khashoggi's yacht. And that yacht Khashoggi had used for sex blackmail purposes, as I note in my book. And then, Trump tries to expand with Resorts International his holdings at Atlantic City, New Jersey, but at the time they were trying to make the new Vegas, essentially. And of course, Vegas itself has a lot of historical organized crime connections. And so did a lot of the, companies trying to make casinos in Atlantic City. But he eventually, has financial issues with that. And in the early 90s, has to be bailed out. He's going bankrupt, and he's bailed out by Rothschild banking interests. The main banker involved there, of course, is Wilbur Ross, who was Trump's Secretary of Commerce during his first term, and that appointment was seen as Trump sort of returning the favor in a way of him being bailed out by, the Rothschild Inc., essentially, in the early 90s. And if that bankrupt, if he hadn't been bailed out then, who knows if Trump would even still be around today as a businessman and a famous public figure.
There's a reason so many names connected to Jeffrey Epstein have quietly disappeared from headlines. And it's not because the evidence doesn't exist. It's because the evidence leads to places the powerful don't want you to look. The deeper you dig, the more the lines blur between government agencies, billionaire financiers, media executives, intelligence operatives, and the very people shaping policy, perception, and the future of the global economy. These aren't isolated incidents or random connections. They're threads in a tightly woven network, one that's protected itself for decades by operating just out of public reach. A name scrubbed from a headline, a key witness dead in custody, a promise to release a list that suddenly doesn't exist. These aren't accidents, they're tactics. What Whitney Webb is doing isn't speculation. It's not hearsay. She's pulling from court documents, declassified files, first-hand testimony, and decades of public records. She's piecing together what institutions, media outlets, and politicians have deliberately left fragmented. Because once the full picture comes into view, it implicates far more than Epstein alone. It implicates the machinery that allowed him to operate. And that's what makes this story so radioactive. Not the crimes we already know about, but the ones still hidden behind layers of protection. Layers that now include people who once promised to tear it all down. If you're still watching, you're already ahead of most. You understand that when stories like this go quiet, it's time to start listening more carefully. So like this video, subscribe for deeper coverage, and leave a comment below. Who's really being protected? And why is the truth still being buried? Thanks for watching.